My name is Felicia Morgan. I am 40 years old. I am a registered nurse at UAB Medical Center in Birmingham, Alabama, where I have worked for 14 years in the cardiac care unit. I have spent 14 years taking care of people in the most critical moments of their lives. I know what sustained caregiving looks like. I know what it costs. I know the specific exhaustion of keeping someone alive over days and weeks and months, the way the exhaustion becomes your background state, and you stop noticing it because it is simply who you are now. I know this professionally. I know it personally. My mother, Ruth Morgan, died on a Tuesday in March after a 3-year decline from congestive heart failure. She was 72 years old. She was a woman who had worked as a cafeteria manager in the Birmingham City school system for 28 years, who had raised 2 daughters on her own after my father left when I was 12, who had made the best biscuits in Jefferson County, and who had an opinion about everything, and expressed those opinions with the unambiguous directness of a woman who had earned the right to speak plainly. She was my mother, and I loved her, and I miss her every day. I cared for her for 3 years. My sister Sharon, who is 44 and has lived in San Diego, California, for 16 years, sent money when she could and called on Sundays and flew in once, for 4 days, when our mother took a serious turn in the 2nd year of her illness. She did not move back. She did not take leave. She did not rearrange her life in any of the specific and costly ways that 3 years of caring for a dying parent requires. She stayed in California, and she managed the situation from 3 time zones away, and she was, in the terms available to someone 3,000 miles distant, as present as she could be. And then our mother died, and Sharon flew back for 4 days. She planned the funeral with the organizational skill of a person who works in event management, because she is a corporate event planner, and she did it beautifully. She wrote the obituary, she selected the flowers, she chose the songs, she gave the eulogy. And at the gathering after the funeral, at my mother's house on Center Street in Birmingham, multiple people, relatives, church members, family friends who had known us for 30 years, came up to me and said some version of the same thing. At least Sharon was here at the end. She really stepped up. She came for 4 days. She got the eulogy. I got the laundry. And I mean this literally, when the gathering ended and everyone went home and Sharon went back to her hotel and I was left at my mother's house, the last thing I did before I drove home that night was start a load of laundry, because the laundry needed to be done and there was no one else to do it, and that was, after 3 years, simply the state of things. I did not cry about it. I was too tired to cry. I just started the laundry, and that is where this story begins. I want to tell you about Ruth Morgan, because this story is about what I did for her and what happened after she died, and she deserves to exist in it as a full person rather than just as the patient I cared for. Ruth Morgan was born in 1951 in Bessemer, Alabama, the 4th of 8 children in a family that was, by the measure of that time and place, poor in the material sense and rich in the ways that are harder to name. Faith, humor, the specific toughness of people who have learned to do a great deal with very little. Her mother cleaned houses for white families in Mountain Brook. Her father worked in the steel mill and came home with soot on his face and sang in the church choir on Sundays. She grew up in a household where the expectation was that you worked hard and you kept your head up, and you did not complain out loud, because complaining out loud was a waste of energy that could be spent on solving the problem. She carried that quality her whole life. She worked in the Birmingham school cafeteria for 28 years, managing a kitchen staff of 6 and feeding hundreds of children every school day, and she was known by the kids as Ms. Ruth and by the staff as the most efficient person in any room she had ever been in. When my father left, I was 12, Sharon was 16, she did not miss a day of work. She told us, in the specific way she told us things that were true and necessary, we are going to be fine. She meant it. We were. She had been healthy for most of her life. A bit of blood pressure, managed with medication, nothing dramatic. And then in her late 60s she began to slow. Not dramatically at first, a breathlessness on stairs that had not been there before, a fatigue after activities that used to be effortless. She went to the doctor, The cardiologist diagnosed congestive heart failure, the heart working harder than it could sustain, the gradual loss of the efficiency that had kept her body running for 70 years. The prognosis was measured, manageable with medication and lifestyle adjustment for some period of time, but managed was different from reversed, and the trajectory was one direction, and we all knew it. We began talking about the future when the diagnosis came. Sharon flew in from California. This was before the 3 years. This was the initial conversation, the planning conversation. We sat at our mother's kitchen table, the three of us, and we talked about what care would look like as things progressed, and what each of us could do. Sharon said she would contribute financially. She was making good money in San Diego, and she would send money every month to help with the costs that Medicare and insurance did not cover. She would call regularly. She would come when she could. I said I would provide the on-the-ground care. I lived 20 minutes from our mother's house. I was a nurse with the specific skills and knowledge that the situation required. I said I would coordinate her medical care, manage her medications, take her to appointments, be there for the daily and nightly needs as they increased. We made this arrangement at a kitchen table in good faith. We were both, I believe, sincere in what we offered. The arrangement was real and it was agreed to by both of us. What the arrangement did not account for was the specific weight of what on-the-ground care actually meant over 3 years, the gap between the plan and the reality. Sharon contributed financially, and she did call and she did come once. But she was 3,000 miles away, and I was 20 minutes away. And there is a thing that happens, when one person is close and one person is far, that is not a failure of love on the part of the person who is far. I believe Sharon loved our mother, genuinely, but that is an unavoidable reality of caregiving. The person who is present does more. And over 3 years, the accumulation of more is a weight that changes you. I want to give you the 3 years honestly, because the 3 years are the center of this story, and they deserve to be named specifically rather than summarized. When people say caregiving, they mean something that has a specific texture that the word does not fully capture. I am going to try to give you some of that texture. Year 1 was the year of adjustment. Our mother's function was declining, but not catastrophically. She was still mobile, still largely independent, still capable of managing most of her daily life with some assistance. I came every day. Not for long visits, sometimes only 45 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. I managed her medication schedule, which had become complex. 6 different medications at 4 different times, several of which had specific timing requirements related to her meals. I attended every cardiology appointment. I coordinated with her primary care physician and her cardiologist, and as the year progressed, a pulmonologist who joined the team when her lungs began to compensate for the heart. I did this while working full-time as a cardiac nurse. Not half-time, full-time, 12-hour shifts, 3 or 4 days a week, in a unit that was demanding by any measure. I was 40 minutes from the hospital and 20 minutes from my mother's house, and I arranged my schedule so that I could always get to her quickly if needed and stop by consistently regardless. In year 1, I did not go on vacation. This was not a dramatic sacrifice. I had been planning a trip to Jamaica with 2 nursing school friends, a trip we had been talking about for 2 years. I canceled it in September. The timing was not right. My mother had had a difficult August, and I was not comfortable being out of the country for 10 days. I told my friends I would join them next year. I did not join them next year, or the year after that. Year 2 was the year our mother stopped being able to drive. This sounds like a smaller thing than it was. My mother had been driving herself her entire adult life. She had a 2008 Honda Accord that she maintained meticulously, and that she had been proud of, and that was, in the specific way of certain things for certain people, a symbol of her independence. When the cardiologist said she should not be driving, she received it with the specific stillness of a woman who knows how to receive hard things without letting them see her falter. She did not falter in front of me either, but I could see it. After 30 years of knowing someone, You learn the difference between the face they show and the face underneath it. I became her transportation. Every appointment, every grocery run, every Sunday morning church service she was still able to attend, which she attended every week until the second year when the stairs became difficult. And after that, I drove her to a church closer to her house that had a ramp. I drove her to the beauty salon the first Saturday of every month because she had been going the first Saturday of every month for 30 years, and she was not going to stop because of a failing heart. I drove her to her best friend Evelyn's house on Wednesday afternoons, for as long as Evelyn was able to have visitors. I drove her to the pharmacy, and to the library, and to the occasional dinner, out at the diner on Montevallo Road, that had been her favorite for as long as I could remember. Sharon called on Sundays. She and our mother talked for 45 minutes to an hour every Sunday. I know this because I was often at the house when she called, and I could hear our mother's voice through the half-closed bedroom door, telling Sharon about the week and asking about Sharon's life and laughing at things, the specific laugh I had heard my whole life. The Sunday calls were a real thing. They meant something. I am not trying to erase them. What they were not was laundry. They were not medication management. They were not the Tuesday morning in February when our mother fell in the bathroom at 3 a.m., and I drove 20 minutes in the dark and sat with her on the bathroom floor while we waited for the ambulance, holding her hand and telling her she was fine, and keeping her calm with the specific competence of someone who has done exactly this in professional settings and knows how to hold both the skill and the fear simultaneously. Sharon called on Sunday. I was there on the Tuesday in February. These are not equivalents. They are both real, they are not equivalents. Year 3 was the hard year. There is a threshold in serious illness where management becomes something different, where the daily work of keeping someone functional gives way to the daily work of keeping someone comfortable. Year 3 was that crossing. Our mother was on supplemental oxygen full-time beginning in February of the 3rd year. The oxygen concentrator sat in the corner of her bedroom and hummed throughout the day and night. She was getting up with help. She was eating less, her appetite declined, as the heart worked harder, the body redirecting resources away from digestion. I managed her nutrition with the careful attention of someone who knows that caloric intake matters for a heart patient, and who also knows that forcing food on someone who has lost the desire to eat is its own form of harm. We found the balance. I took a leave of absence from the hospital in October of year 3. Not formal, full medical leave. My unit was short-staffed and I could not leave entirely. I reduced my hours to 2 shifts a week, and I arranged my schedule around my mother's care. I took the financial hit of reduced hours. I did not tell Sharon about the reduced hours, because telling Sharon would have produced the specific conversation I did not have the energy for. The offers to help that could not materialize into actual help at the level the situation required, the expressions of concern that would then require managing on top of everything else. I hired a home health aide to be with my mother during the days I worked. Her name was Carla, and she was excellent, and she and my mother developed a genuine affection over the months she was there. Carla cooked for my mother and talked with her, and watched the game shows my mother loved, and treated her with the dignity that the situation demanded. I paid for Carla partially out of the money Sharon sent, and partially out of my own reduced income. I did not sleep well for 3 years. This is not a detail I am offering for sympathy. It is a medical fact about caregiving that people who have not done it tend not to understand. The anxiety of being the primary responsible person does not turn off when you go home for the night. I was 20 minutes away. I was always 20 minutes away. I left a key with Mrs. Betty Crawford next door, and I gave her my number and I asked her to call me if anything concerned her. Mrs. Crawford called me 11 times in 3 years. I drove to my mother's house at 2 a.m., at 4 a.m., at midnight, at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. Each time was different. Each time the specific competence of a trained cardiac nurse handled it. Each time I drove home afterward and lay in the dark and did the calculation that caregivers do. How much longer? What does the trajectory say? What are we preparing for? I grieved my mother for 3 years before she died. This is what anticipatory grief looks like: the daily accumulation of the understanding that the person you are caring for is declining and will eventually be gone. You do not save this grief for the end. You live inside it while also living inside the daily practical reality of keeping them alive and comfortable and dignified. You hold both simultaneously for 3 years. Sharon did not do this. She could not, from California. The distance that kept her from the Tuesday at 3 a.m. also kept her from the 3 years of anticipatory grief. She would arrive for the funeral at a different stage of it than I was at, and that difference was going to make the difference in how each of us moved through the funeral and the gathering and the aftermath. I want to be clear about something before I tell you about Sharon's 4 days. I do not think Sharon is a bad person. I do not think she did not love our mother. What I think is that there is a specific phenomenon that occurs in families with caregiving situations where one sibling is geographically close and one is far. The close sibling does the daily work. The distant sibling manages their love from a distance. And when the end comes, the distant sibling arrives and is visible in a way that the close sibling, whose labor has been continuous and background, is not. Sharon arrived and was seen because she had not been there before. I had been there every day for 3 years and had been invisible because that is what continuous presence does. It becomes the backdrop rather than the foreground. And our family and our community made a decision, without malice, but clearly, about who deserved the applause. Sharon Morgan is 44 years old. She has lived in San Diego for 16 years, since she took a job with a corporate event management company that had offices there, and that she has since climbed to a senior director position. She is good at what she does. She has the specific quality of someone who can manage multiple moving parts simultaneously while projecting ease, which is both an event management skill and a personality trait that Sharon had long before she went into event management. She is also genuinely warm. I want to say this clearly because this story is not about Sharon being a cold person. She is warm. She and I have always had a good relationship, not without tensions. All sisters have tensions, but fundamentally close in the way of two people who grew up with the same mother in the same house and carry the same specific memories of what that house was. When we were together at our mother's house in those 3 years, at Christmas, at Easter, at the occasional long weekend when Sharon came, we were ourselves together. We cooked together. We laughed at the same things. She knows me and I know her. The problem is not who Sharon is. The problem is what the situation produced and how the family responded to it. Sharon flew in once during the 3 years, in year 2, when our mother had a serious hospitalization. She came for 4 days. She was present and helpful in those 4 days. She sat with our mother at the hospital. She coordinated with the discharge team. She helped me think through the next steps. She cried at the hospital in a way that our mother found comforting. On the 4th day, she flew back to San Diego because she had work commitments she could not move. She called me the day she left. She said, "I hate leaving you with this." I said, "It's okay, we have a plan, go." She said, "You are incredible, Felicia, I want you to know that." I said, "Go, Sharon." She went. We talked every 2 weeks or so. Not the formal Sunday calls she had with our mother, those were theirs, separate from our sibling communication. The calls between Sharon and me were about logistics and decisions, whether to change a medication, whether a piece of equipment would help, what the hospice timeline conversation might look like when we got there. She was a genuine partner in the decision-making. She was just not a partner in the doing. I told myself this was okay. I told myself it was the arrangement we had agreed to and that it was functioning as designed. Sharon contributed money and remote support. I contributed time and presence. This was the arrangement. What I could not have told myself in advance, and what I understood only gradually over 3 years, was the specific emotional cost of being the person who does the doing. Not the cost of the work itself. I was a nurse. I was trained for the work. The work was hard but knowable. The cost of being unseen in it. Of being so continuously present that my presence became invisible, while Sharon's absence made her arrival notable. Our family and our community knew I was caring for our mother. This was not a secret. People from the church, the neighbors, family members who came to visit, they saw me there. They said thank you, they said you are doing such a good job, they said we appreciate everything you do. These were genuine expressions of genuine appreciation. They were also, I understood after the funeral, private acknowledgments. Things said quietly to me, one-on-one, in the specific register of things that people acknowledge without turning them into a public story. What I did was not given a public story. It was received as the background, the expected thing, the thing that was supposed to happen because I was the close daughter, the nurse, the one who was there. Sharon's arrival was the foreground. The California daughter who had come all this way, who had stepped up so beautifully at the end. I had 3 years. She had 4 days. And the room, at the gathering after the funeral, treated 4 visible days as equivalent to or greater than 3 invisible years. I am not asking for a trophy. I am not asking for a standing ovation. I am saying that what happened at the gathering was a specific form of erasure that I had not been prepared for, and that landed with a weight I did not have words for until Mrs. Betty Crawford stood up. Our mother entered hospice care in February, 6 weeks before she died. I had known the conversation was coming for months. I am a nurse. I know what the numbers say. I know what the trajectory of congestive heart failure looks like. And I had been, in my private thinking, preparing for it for longer than I acknowledged out loud. The hospice conversation, with the palliative care team and our mother and me, was one of the most important and most difficult conversations I have had in my professional or personal life. Not because the information was unexpected, I had been working toward this understanding for months. Because sitting across from your mother, while a palliative care doctor explains that the goal is now comfort rather than cure, is a different experience from sitting across from a patient's family member in a professional capacity. I knew everything that was being said. I was not prepared for what it felt like. I called Sharon that evening. I told her what had been discussed, what the timeline was likely to look like, what our mother's wishes were for the final period. Sharon was quiet for a long time, then she said, "I need to come." I said, "Not yet, the timeline is probably 6 to 8 weeks. I will call you when it looks like we are getting close." "Come then." She said, "Felicia, are you sure? I feel like I should." I said, "Sharon, I have this. Come when I call you, that is what she needs." She came in the 3rd week of March, when our mother had been unconscious for 2 days, and the hospice nurse told me the timeline had narrowed to days. Sharon flew in on a Thursday. She sat with our mother for the last 2 days. She was holding her hand on the Tuesday morning when our mother died, just after 6 a.m. I was there too, I had been there all night. We were both there when she went. I am glad Sharon was there. I mean this completely. Our mother deserved to have both of her daughters at the end, and she had both of her daughters, and that is the right thing. I am not telling you this story to say that Sharon should not have been there at the end. I am telling you this story to say that 4 days at the end is not 3 years. After our mother died, Sharon took over. This is her gift: organization, logistics, the moving of many parts into a coherent whole, and she deployed it fully. She called the funeral home. She wrote the obituary. She contacted the church. She chose the flowers. She coordinated the catering for the gathering. She made a slideshow of photographs for the service. She did all of this in the specific way of someone who is grieving and coping through competent action, which is a real and understandable response to grief. I watched her do it. I was not excluded. She asked for my input. She deferred to me on specific questions about our mother's preferences. She was collaborative and warm. But she was the one doing it, and I was the one watching, and there was something in that reversal, the role switching, me as the one who was not doing rather than the one who was doing, that I sat with quietly. I sat with it because I was too tired to do anything else. 3 years and 1 last month and the dying itself. I sat with it, and I let Sharon organize the funeral, and I told myself that this was right, that she was doing something, contributing something, filling the space that was hers to fill since the space I had been filling for 3 years had now closed. I told myself I should be grateful. I was grateful. And I was also, underneath the gratitude, feeling something that I could not fully name until the gathering, when the relatives and the church members and the family friends started arriving and started saying the things they said. The funeral was on a Friday. The church was full, my mother was known and loved in a way that fills sanctuaries, the way long lives fully lived fill the people around them. The service was beautiful. The music was right. The pastor spoke about her in terms that were accurate and loving. The photographs in the slideshow were the right photographs. And Sharon gave the eulogy. I want to tell you about the eulogy, because the eulogy was the moment the dynamic became visible in its fullest form. Sharon had written it herself, without consulting me in the substantive sense. She shared it with me the morning of the funeral, 2 hours before the service, and asked if there was anything I wanted to add. There was not time to add anything meaningful. I read it. It was beautifully written. It was accurate and warm and specific in the way that good eulogies are specific. It described our mother, with the love of a daughter who knew her. It was also, predominantly, written from the perspective of the daughter who had been in California. What I mean is this: the eulogy described our mother through the lens of the Sunday calls, the visits when they happened, the relationship maintained across 3,000 miles. It described a love that was real. It did not describe the last 3 years. It did not describe the medication management, or the driving, or the 3 a.m. falls, or the oxygen concentrator. It did not describe the last month of hospice, or the nights of vigil. It described a mother and a daughter who had maintained a loving relationship across distance. I sat in the front row and I listened to the eulogy, and I felt the specific vertigo of a person who is being described as the background of their own story. I was there. My presence was acknowledged. Sharon mentioned me in the eulogy, warmly, saying that our mother had been blessed to have a devoted daughter nearby. Devoted daughter nearby. That was the phrase. Devoted daughter nearby. I had reduced my work hours and driven 20 minutes every day for 3 years, and sat on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., and managed 6 medications at 4 times a day, and driven to every appointment, and done every load of laundry, and learned the specific sound of her breathing when the oxygen was dropping. I was the devoted daughter nearby. After the service, at the gathering at my mother's house, people came. This is what happens after funerals in Birmingham, Alabama, in communities that have known each other for generations. The house fills with food and people, and the specific noise of collective grief and collective remembrance. People who had known our mother for 30 and 40 years. Church members, neighbors, former co-workers from the school cafeteria, family from Bessemer. They came to me, they hugged me, they said kind things, and more than a few of them said some version of the following: "At least Sharon was here at the end, she really stepped up." Or, "Sharon did such a beautiful job with everything, the eulogy, the flowers, all of it. You must be so grateful to have her." Or, and this is the one I have returned to most often in the months since, a woman from our mother's church who had known us since we were children said to me, with genuine warmth, "I know the two of you share the load differently. It is so good that Sharon could be here at the end." Share the load differently. I had done 1,095 days and she had done 4. We shared the load differently. I am not going to say the eulogy was bad. I am not going to tell you it was a performance or a strategic act. I believe Sharon wrote it from genuine love and genuine grief, and that the way she wrote it reflected the relationship she had with our mother. The relationship maintained across distance, the phone calls and the visits, and the love that did not diminish because of the miles. What I am going to say is that the eulogy told an incomplete story. And when a story is told incompletely at a funeral, in front of 100 people who are going to walk away with that story as their understanding of what happened, the incompleteness does a specific kind of harm. The harm is the erasure of the caregiving work from the public record of the death. Our mother's obituary, which Sharon wrote beautifully, said that she was cared for lovingly by her family in her final years. Family, not Felicia, not the specific nurse who drove 20 minutes every day and reduced her work hours and paid for home health aid care and sat on bathroom floors at 3 a.m. Family. I understand why Sharon wrote it that way. It is true and it is inclusive. But it is also imprecise in a way that, in the context of the gathering and the eulogy and the, at least Sharon was here at the end conversations, amounted to a systematic erasure of what I had done over 3 years. I have thought about whether Sharon was aware of this, whether the framing was conscious or unconscious. My honest conclusion is, I do not know, and it does not fully matter. Conscious or unconscious, the effect was the same. And the effect was that in the public record of our mother's death, the eulogy, the obituary, the gathering conversation, the person who had been there for 3 years was credited for being devoted and nearby, and the person who had been there for 4 days was credited for stepping up beautifully. I did not say anything at the gathering. This was a choice I made deliberately and that I do not regret. My mother's funeral was not the place for it. My mother had deserved a gathering that was about her and her life and her love and her death, and I was not going to introduce a conflict into that space. Whatever needed to be said would be said elsewhere, at another time. I did not expect someone to say it for me. I did not expect Mrs. Betty Crawford to stand up. I did not expect the gathering to become, unexpectedly and without my initiation, the moment the record was corrected. I had not planned for that. But Mrs. Betty Crawford had been my mother's next-door neighbor for 18 years. She had seen every car. She had noted every early morning arrival and every late evening departure. She had called me 11 times in 3 years with concerns. She knew what had happened better than anyone in that room except me. And she was not willing to leave without saying it. The gathering lasted about 3 hours. The house was full, the way my mother would have wanted it, full and loud, and with more food than any reasonable number of people could consume. I moved through it the way you move through the gathering after your mother's funeral when you are the daughter who was there every day for 3 years, with the specific autopilot of someone who is too exhausted for the room, but has been responsible for too long to stop being responsible now. I received people. I thanked them for coming. I said the right things in response to the right things. I accepted food onto a plate I did not eat from. The comments about Sharon came throughout the gathering. Not constant, not a drumbeat of them. Distributed, in the natural way of a large gathering where many people are talking to me over several hours, but distributed enough that by the second hour I had heard some version of it 5 times. At least Sharon was here at the end. She really stepped up. The eulogy, Sharon did such a beautiful job, such a devoted daughter. Sharon organized everything so beautifully. You can tell how much she loved your mother. I know this has been hard on you both. I'm so glad Sharon could come and share the load. Your mama was so lucky to have both of you. Sharon really came through. I want to be clear about what I felt hearing these comments. Not betrayal by the people who said them. They did not know what they did not know. Not anger at Sharon specifically. She was across the room, also receiving people, also grieving, also exhausted in her own way. What I felt was something more specific and more solitary. The feeling of being entirely invisible inside a room full of people who were there, theoretically, to acknowledge what our family had been through. I had been there for 3 years. The room knew I had been there for 3 years, not in the specific way, but in the general sense. They knew I lived close. They knew I was the nurse. They had seen me at church events with our mother, had seen me at the grocery store buying things for her, had heard Ruth talk about Felicia coming by every day. They knew. And still, somehow, Sharon's 4 days of visible, organized, publicly performed grief had landed in the room with more weight than my 3 years of invisible, daily, unglamorous presence. The eulogy had been seen. The flowers had been seen. The organized gathering had been seen. The daily caregiving had been background. I had started my 3rd glass of sweet tea, standing near the kitchen door where I had retreated because I needed a moment that was not someone's kind words about Sharon, when I heard a chair scrape. And I looked out at the living room, and I saw Mrs. Betty Crawford, who was 73 years old and had been my mother's neighbor for 18 years, and had a voice that carried in enclosed spaces, standing up. Mrs. Betty Crawford is 73 years old and has lived in the house next door to my mother's house on Center Street in Birmingham for 18 years. She is a retired postal worker and the matriarch of a large family, and a woman who has, over those 18 years, been our mother's most consistent neighbor in the full sense of the word. The person who noticed and helped and paid attention with the specific generosity of someone who understands that neighbors are a form of community. She had called me 11 times over 3 years. Not 11 trivial calls, calls about things she had observed that warranted a call, a noise in the night that concerned her, a car parked in a way that suggested a problem, a missed morning in which she had not seen the usual signs of activity. 11 times over 3 years, she had been the backup to my backup, the eyes and ears I relied on to tell me when I could not be there what the situation was. She knew, better than almost anyone in that room except me, what the 3 years had looked like from the outside. She had seen my car in the driveway at 6 a.m. and at 10 p.m. She had seen me carrying grocery bags and oxygen equipment and the specific logistics of sustained in-home care. She had seen me arrive in the dark on the nights she had called. She had watched my mother's house become the site of a 3-year vigil, from the perspective of a woman who lived 20 feet away and paid attention. She had known Sharon would come. She had watched Sharon arrive at the beginning of the week. She had watched the organization, the flowers being delivered, the people coming and going. She had watched the funeral from a car she did not drive to the church because her own mobility had declined and she had gotten a ride. She had watched the gathering begin. And she had been sitting in the living room for 2 hours, listening to people say things about Sharon that were true and inadequate, true about what Sharon had done, inadequate about what Sharon had not done, and completely silent about what I had done. And she had decided that she was not going to leave without saying something. She stood up from her chair, which required effort because her knees were what they were, and she held onto the arm of the chair for a moment. And then she straightened up with the specific dignity of a woman who has something to say and is going to say it. The room noticed. When a 73-year-old woman stands up deliberately in a room of people, the room notices. She said, "I need to say something about Felicia. I have been sitting here for 2 hours, and I have heard a lot of fine things said, and I am not disagreeing with any of them. But there is something that has not been said, and I am not able to leave without saying it." The living room went quiet in the gradual way of a room of 30 people that becomes quiet when someone has standing and intention and something to say. It took perhaps 20 seconds. Mrs. Crawford looked around the room. She looked at me where I was standing near the kitchen door. She gave me one brief look, the kind that says, "I am about to do something, is that okay?" I did not have time to respond. She turned back to the room. She said, "I have lived next door to Ruth Morgan for 18 years. I have watched this family for 18 years. I want to tell you what those years looked like from where I was standing." She said, "For the last 3 years, every morning, and I mean every morning, I am not exaggerating, I watched Felicia's car come down Center Street. Before the sun was fully up most days. I saw the car pull up and I saw Felicia go in. Some days for an hour, some days for half the day. Some days I saw her car outside at 9 at night and still there at midnight." She said, "I know Felicia called her on the phone 11 times because she asked me to watch and call when something concerned me. 11 times in 3 years I called that girl and 11 times she was there. In the dark, in the rain, when she had worked a 12-hour shift and came straight here afterward. I saw it. I was there." She said, "I am glad Sharon came for the funeral. I am glad she was here at the end. But I need this room to know that the devotion that got Ruth Morgan to the end, the daily, unglamorous, show up when nobody is watching devotion, that was Felicia. Every day, for 3 years, I watched it." Music, nothing, the room. The room was completely still. Not the silence of judgment. The silence of people who have received accurate information and are adjusting their understanding. I was standing near the kitchen door and I felt something happen in my chest that I am still not sure I have the right word for. Not triumph, it was not the feeling of winning something. Something more like being seen. The specific physical sensation of having been invisible for a long time and then, in one room on one afternoon, being visible. Mrs. Crawford had done the thing I had not known I needed someone to do. She had put my presence into the public record. She had said out loud what had been background for 3 years. After Mrs. Crawford sat back down, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then my Aunt Cynthia, my mother's oldest sister, who had come from Bessemer for the funeral, stood up and said, "Betty Crawford said what needed to be said. I want to add my voice to that." She looked at me. She said, "Felicia, your mother was so proud of you, we all saw it. We should have been saying it louder all along." Then my cousin Darnell, who had been in and out of my mother's house over the years on his own visits, said, "Felicia drove me to the hospital when I visited Aunt Ruth back in the fall. 2 hours, early morning, she had already been up for 2 hours. That woman does not stop." The room was responding. Not in a scripted way, the way that rooms respond when someone has said a true thing and other people recognize the truth of it. Sharon across the room was quiet. She had the specific stillness of someone who is hearing things and processing them and is not sure what to do with them. She did not look defensive. She looked, and I want to give her this accurately, she looked ashamed. Not cornered, not attacked. Ashamed. As if what Mrs. Crawford had said had landed in her the way accurate information sometimes lands, not as accusation but as clarity. She came to me later that evening, after the gathering had wound down. She said, "Felicia, I knew what you were doing, and I did not say it in the eulogy, and I should have. I should have said it in the obituary, and I should have said it to every person who came through that door, and I did not, and that was wrong." I looked at my sister. I said, "I know you loved her." She said, "I know you did too, more than anyone in that room." I did not answer that. Not because I disagreed. Because it was late and I was very tired, and the laundry at my mother's house still needed to be started, and I was the one who was going to start it, and that was simply the state of things. I went home. I did the laundry. And I sat on the couch in my quiet house, and I thought about Mrs. Betty Crawford, who had stood up at a gathering and said out loud what she had watched for 3 years. And I thought, that is what witnessing looks like. That is what it means to have been seen. I went back to full-time work in May. The return to full shifts felt like both a relief and a disorientation. The rhythm of caring for my mother had become my rhythm, and the absence of it was its own kind of adjustment. Sharon and I have been in regular contact since the funeral. More regular than before, we talk every week now, which is more than we talked during the 3 years when the calls were largely logistical. Something in what happened at the gathering opened a space between us for a different kind of conversation. She has said, more than once, that she thinks about the 3 years, and about the choices she made, and that she is still sitting with what she wishes had been different. I have not told her that I forgive her, not because I am withholding it, but because I am not sure forgiveness is the right frame. She made a choice about her life that kept her in California, and that choice was hers to make. What was not handled well was the aftermath, the eulogy that told an incomplete story, the family that read visibility as devotion and invisibility as background. That is what I am sitting with, not Sharon's choice to live 3,000 miles away. The way the room read us at the end. Mrs. Crawford sent me a card 3 weeks after the funeral. She had written in her careful, rounded handwriting, "I hope I said the right thing. I hope it helped. Your mother was so proud of you, Felicia. I heard her say it many times. I wanted the room to know." I read that card 3 times. I put it on the refrigerator. It is still there. The laundry at my mother's house is done now. Someone else washes the clothes in that house, the new tenant, a young couple who moved in July and who do not know that a woman named Felicia used to park in that driveway every morning. They do not need to know. The care happened. The witness stood up. The record in that room is accurate. That is enough. I am 40 years old. I am a registered nurse. I care for people in the most critical moments of their lives, and I know what sustained caregiving costs, and I know what it gives back, and I know that the giving back is rarely in the form you expect. What I keep from 3 years of caring for my mother is not the exhaustion, though the exhaustion was real. Not the resentment, though there were moments of resentment, and I do not pretend otherwise. What I keep is the specific knowledge that I was there. Every day. Every morning before the sun was fully up. Every late night and every 3 a.m. bathroom floor. I was there. And because I was there, my mother died the way she deserved to die. At home, in comfort, with her medications managed and her dignity maintained, and both of her daughters holding her hands at the end. I keep Mrs. Betty Crawford's card on the refrigerator. I keep the specific feeling of standing near the kitchen door at the gathering when she stood up. I keep the room going quiet. I keep her voice saying, "I watched it. Every day, for 3 years, I watched it." And I keep the laundry, metaphorically. The laundry that got done not because anyone was watching but because it needed to be done. That is what care looks like. Not a eulogy, not 4 beautiful days. The laundry, the medication at 4 times a day, the 20-minute drive in the dark. She came for 4 days. She got the eulogy, I got the laundry. I would do it all again. The laundry, all of it. If you stayed until the end, thank you. Week 3 begins here. This story is for every invisible caregiver. For every person who drove 20 minutes every morning before the sun was up. For every person who did the laundry and the medications, and the 3 a.m. bathroom floors, and the insurance calls, and the doctor appointments, and all of the daily, unglamorous, background work of keeping a dying person alive and comfortable and dignified. For every person who did all of that, and then stood at the gathering, while people complimented the sibling who came for the funeral. You are not invisible. Even when the room cannot see you, you know what you did. The person you cared for knew what you did. And if you are lucky, there is a Mrs. Betty Crawford somewhere who is watching and who is not willing to leave without saying it. If you have been the caregiver in your family, I want you to hear this. What you did was real. The work was real. The cost was real. The love was real. The room at the gathering was wrong. You were not background. You were the whole story. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me if you have been the invisible caregiver. I read every single one. Subscribe, hit the bell, share this. More stories coming. I'll see you next time.